What do you do when happily ever after comes to a grinding halt and I do becomes I don't? Author Laura Petherbridge has some answers in her book as she offers practical steps for healing during separation and divorce. And we are so happy that she's joining us on the couch today. Laura, welcome to Full Circle.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Now, you make a comment right at the beginning of your book that I found really interesting and eye-opening. You say divorce is worse than death because it's chosen abandonment.
That's correct. And sometimes people will get a little bit offended by that if they've lost a spouse to death. They think, well, that you're minimizing the pain and the grief of losing a spouse. And that's not what I mean. What I'm saying is it's a chosen rejection. Should my husband die, he's not choosing to walk out on me. And so the layers of loss, there are more of them when a spouse walks out than when they die. When you go through a divorce, you lose your in-laws, you lose your pets, you lose your health insurance, you lose your income, you lose your home many times.
Often your friends.
Often your friends. Many people lose their church. And so the layers of loss are so very, very significant. And, you know, if my husband had died, people would be showing up on my front porch with a tuna casserole. Well, when he walked out, they didn't do that. As a matter of fact, many of them stepped away, stepped back, felt they had to take sides, so it can be much more painful.
And you know, your experience, as you said, your husband walked out on you and it was through an affair, so you kind of had the kosher divorce.
Yes.
In terms of the faith community, and that's what you experienced. How much worse is it for people when it's not as clear cut and people might be taking sides even more or blaming
That's right.
one or the other or both?
Believe me, I get emails from those also, and they are devastated because I have many people that tell me losing my spouse was horrible, but my church turning their back on me was the worst. You know, that it was worse than losing their spouse.
Well, what would you say to the church, you know, in terms of how can we better minister to the needs of people who are going through this really horrific experience?
Well, the first thing I would encourage them to do is to start hosting a divorce recovery support group. You know, they can use something like my book. I wrote it intentionally with questions at the end of each chapter, so it can be used in a small group. The thing that the church often fears is they think if they minister to people going through divorce that they're condoning divorce. And so you can still keep a firm line of saying we value marriage. We honor marriage. We view marriage as sacred. God hates divorce, but he doesn't hate divorced people. He loves divorced people.
Right.
And so there's where we have to get that line of saying, and you know what, probably 95% of the people, I've been doing this 20 years, 95% of the people that would come to my divorce recovery seminars, workshops, support groups, they're the ones that did not want the marriage to end. So that would be my encouragement to the church.
You know, Laura, I was just going to respond about, because you say about the church responds that way, and from my own experience, I actually had a church and community that lovingly cared for me, supported me, and
Wonderful.
I really believe in my healing. That was key.
Yes.
But I think one of the biggest things, you say we talk about the loss of dreams.
Yes.
And I think also the place in which, even for myself, the sense of rejection and abandonment. How does, I mean, I know my own journey, but I mean, if you were going to give even like a soundbite to somebody, how do you, as a person, being rejected and abandoned by someone who you completely gave yourself to, how do you walk through that and make sense of it?
Yeah, it really is hard, and it doesn't come quickly. That's the thing I would really encourage people, is so often we live in such an instantaneous world. In particular, if we're looking at Hollywood, you know, these people hop in and out of marriages quicker than you can get a Happy Meal at McDonald's. So don't use that as your role model for, and I'm not, you know, saying negative things about Hollywood. It just gives the image that you can get over this quickly. And so you're talking about the death of the dream. So often I meet people that their marriage died over a long period of time. See, my marriage died like a plane crash. Boom. One day found out he was out and in another relationship, and it was, you know, on its way to over. But many people say to me, I don't feel that grieving process because my marriage has died over a very long period of time, like a slow-growing cancer. But you see, as you said, there's the death of the dream, the death of the covenant, and the death of what should have been. And see, if we don't grieve those things, so that rejection needs that grief, that needs that grieving process. And we don't like grief. We run from it. We want to numb it. We want to medicate it. We want to get over it as quickly as possible. So my first suggestion of advice would be walk through the pain, not around it. don't numb it with drugs or alcohol or a new relationship. That's the worst thing somebody can do. So.
Now, Laura, am I right? You were 29.
Yes, I was 28, 29, somewhere.
You were
So long ago, I'm having a hard time remembering.
you were young, and you were a baby Christian.
Yes.
You were new in the faith.
Yep.
You still felt like a failure.
Yes.
And considered suicide.
I did.
I want you to talk about that, because I'm sure many identify with it, but what difference did your personal faith make in this journey?
Yes, well, I probably wouldn't be here if I hadn't, even though I was a baby Christian. Divorce for me was the biggest failure that anybody could go through. My parents had divorced. I had one goal in my life: I will never be divorced. This was like the ultimate worst thing that could happen to me. So when my husband walked out of the marriage, this for me was the ultimate failure. This was, you, now it's valid, everybody knows it, you are a loser, you are unlovable, you are fat, ugly, stupid, any negative thing you can think to name yourself is how I felt about myself. And so that's why I seriously contemplated taking my life during that time. I was drinking very heavily, which is not advisable at all, but to numb the pain. I was such a baby Christian, and I just didn't know, there were no support groups. I just, you know, I didn't do that for a long period of time, but I did do it for a season of time, and it just made me so depressed. But if I would sit by my stereo, this goes to show how long ago this was, I would sit by my stereo and play worship music. I couldn't pray. I was too weak and too devastated to even pray. But I could sit by my music and play worship music, just the memory of it even still, you know, and sing those praises to God. And it was the only thing I had. It was like, God, this is all I've got to give you. It's just this music coming out of my mouth, and rescue me. If you don't show up, I will not make it.
Sorry, that's so good, because it echoes me.
Yes.
And I think I'm teary because moments in my bed going, I can't do this.
Yes.
And I remember a girlfriend of mine saying, Melinda, today is not your forever.
Yeah.
And that it's one day at a time, and God is with you. And you say in Hebrews, right, is it that God has never left me or abandoned me.
That's
people
right.
can leave and people can go, but God's promises is that He will never leave or abandon.
Right.
I think those promises are the things that will get anyone through, because that's all you've got.
That's right.
And so I resonate with the worship music. I brought my journal. I remember they said, you know, if you can't say it or pray it, then write it. And so my journal is full of prayers and anger and grief and pictures and things of my life.
Yes.
In a way of just being able to express all the emotions and the grief.
Yeah.
And it really is more of a life grief book through that season of my own separation.
It really is. And when you look back, you know, in a couple years from now, when you look back on that, you will be able to see more. I can look back now and see where God stepped up and met my needs, my financial needs. You know, I continued to tithe during that, even though on paper there was like no way, even if I didn't tithe, there was no way I was going to be able to pay my bills. And I thought, you know what, Lord, you say test me in this, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to continue